Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. So we have reached the end of Magnus Week, and as we begun it at the beginning of his journey, we end it by discussing the one event it had to be: Magnus's reunion with the Emperor of Mankind. Spoiler warning to begin, the events we are discussing today are from the Horus Heresy novel Fury of Magnus by Graham McNeill. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. Not only that, we help to support the great Games Workshop and Black Library, because without them, we don't have this amazing lore to talk about. I will put a link in the description as always. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. Okay, yesterday we discussed Magnus's encounter with Malcador the Sigillite, and we saw just how much the Primarch had been clinging on so desperately to the promise of salvation. And when that dream was shattered before his very eyes, we may just have seen part of that Primarch of old die along with it. The only course of action left to him now: killing his father, the Emperor of Mankind. Before Magnus leaves the shore of the lake, he wonders for a moment how their lives would have been different had he and his brothers been raised upon Terra. Growing within these villas, how different their bonds and relationships would have been. Would the same friendships have occurred, and would the heresy have still arose? Wasting no more time for fear of pursuit, Magnus and his 3 remaining sons take an elevator upwards, emerging into Malcador's gallery of ancient artifacts. And as Magnus reflects on all the history that will be lost with the needless devastation, a voice answers his rhetorical question. The gallery fills with a golden light, and the artifacts shine as if new. The Emperor of Mankind has come, under his guise of revelation. Magnus asks his father if he knows why he is here. Of course he does. "I do," said Revelation, "but first, we will talk, my son." Following his father through the doorway, Magnus and his sons are teleported into the throne room. Following Revelation along, they pass thousands of servants of the Mechanicum, all diligently working over the countless pipes and machinery, all of it leading to one thing: the Golden Throne. Behind the throne lays 2 vast golden doors, and atop the throne itself, the true form of the Emperor sits, his eyes closed and his body locked in tension, the power and suffering pouring out of him in equal measure. Now Magnus is aghast at what his actions have caused, and there's a great line in response from the Emperor's revelation. "The irony of your purpose is not lost on me, Magnus, but it has cost so much to keep the Neverborn hordes back that I find myself unable to truly appreciate it." It's such a great little line, highlighting that single moment that Magnus tore his way through the wards around the Webway project. The Emperor has been stuck holding back the tides of the enemy, away from all of the events of the heresy. Magnus, after the horror and shock, begins to react in anger, snapping back that he only knew what his father told him, and it flaming even further when his father responds that ought to have been enough. The arrogance of the father, inherited by the son. Magnus truly is his father's son, so alike him in so many ways. Asking where the custodians are, Revelation replies he removed them. That right now they are trying to break back in, fearing what plan their lord is up to. And it's here it all comes out. The Emperor planned to get Magnus here all along. He showed Magnus the crack in the shield to allow him entry into the palace, and how he hoped he would remember the secret pathways. However, this all angers Magnus further, and he slays the Revelation before him, turning to ascend the throne to his true father above. Ahriman and the other sons remain steadfast at the bottom. This conversation is not for their ears. And as Magnus reaches the top, standing before his father once more, for the first time since truly the Nicaea Council, the pain of that day comes rushing back. He sees the tension and sweat clear upon his father's face, but still the Emperor's eyes remain closed. This is truly a huge gamble here by the Emperor. He is gambling everything, the very existence of terror, on Magnus not killing him. He fought back to Prospero, to the irreplaceable knowledge that had been lost, and his many sons who had died there, to the lies and betrayal at Nicaea. He fought off the falsehoods he had been assured were truths, the broken promises, and the lost hope of a shared future of exploration within the great ocean. He looked into the face of his father, drawing his arm back to hurl his staff like a native harpooner. The spear trembled in his grip, forming the perfect blade. His knuckles pressed white on its smoking haft. Its bladed tip burned orange, brightening to molten radiance, infused with all the anguish of Magnus's fractured soul. It would be a killing strike, powerful enough to end a god's reign. He lowered the spear, his head sinking to his chest as regret threatened to choke him. The rage and power suffusing its god-slaying blade was snuffed out like a candle at dawn. "I loved you like no other," wept Magnus. Oh man, the feels here. We know how this story is supposed to end, how it has to go, and yet you're praying for Magnus not to do it, yearning for him to come back to the Imperium. And then as you're on those emotional tenterhooks, Magnus lowers that spear, and your heart breaks alongside his. So many of the Primarchs have had their tragic stories, emotional journeys and trials, but I don't think there's one that is so perfect from beginning to end as Magnus's. Graham McNeill has crafted such a deep, rich and real character with Magnus. So much so that you can't help but somehow wish for him to succeed, and yet fail at the same time. For the Emperor to survive, but for Magnus to receive his vindication. All of Magnus's journey has led him to this moment, here and now. Since the earliest of warnings of his brothers, to the beginning of his feud with Russ, to the sanction of Nicaea and the burning of Prospero, here and now, staring into the face of his father, it's all just too much. Then, slamming down before him in a crash of thunder, stands his brother, the Lord of Drakes, Vulcan. Magnus immediately defends himself, expecting an assault of wrath and hatred from his brother. But Vulcan doesn't, lowering his warhammer to his belt and simply stating a word that slices straight into Magnus's heart: brother. As we've seen throughout, Magnus is just so torn, just wanting to embrace his brother of old, yet knowing he can't, instead recalling a memory of a shard who stood vigil over Vulcan's body. And as he speaks, his voice cracks and trembles with emotion. The two brothers just continue to talk, sharing a moment together in this universe of chaos, even a small smile crossing Vulcan's lips. But of course, a moment is all they can take, and they have to return to the situation at hand. Vulcan seems stronger than ever. Magnus asking him what he intends to do. Vulcan replies, "That all depends on you." And before his father, before his brother, Magnus concedes he's more lost than ever. From the very moment Magnus entered the palace, he's been fighting his own nature, trying to convince himself that the shard was the only possible redemption. Yet with every step he's taken, that conviction has been eaten away. The memories, meeting Malcador, his brother, and his father. It's all to the point now. He's so conflicted he feels more lost than ever. And it's then the Emperor of Mankind opens his eyes. "You are not lost, my son. You are exactly where you need to be." The Emperor takes Magnus to a vision of Prospero, Magnus confessing he came to kill him, and lamenting he didn't mean to end Malcador. All of this, of course, the Emperor knows. And here we get to a part I've seen referenced a lot, in the Emperor speaking of Malcador's death, stating his death was a sacrifice he knew he might be asked to make, that he and Malcador have shared a journey longer than any other. Yet, in regards to the danger mankind faces, his death is irrelevant. And I think it's that last piece that really strikes people. His death is irrelevant. They take this as meaning the Emperor didn't care for Malcador. Now you take that out of context, and sure, it sounds like he doesn't care at all. But it's not out of context. There are several uploads on this channel already where we really highlight the bond and friendship between Malcador and the Emperor. That it was a true bond. And in this specific situation, firstly the Emperor, literally the line before, has just spoken of their shared journey. And with that last comment, he's comparing a single life to the fate of the entire race. Is it a little unexpected, or even inappropriate in the moment for a normal human to make? Yes, of course. But we're speaking of the Emperor of Mankind, someone whose entire existence revolves around the fate of mankind, and it teeters on the brink in this very moment. And perhaps most conclusively, in the previous chapter, when the Emperor has come to Olivia to ask her to sacrifice her life to bring Malcador back, we get this line: "The tears he shed were real and painfully raw." Of course, as I always say, we all interpret the law differently, and that's the beauty of it. But for me, it's still perfectly clear. Malcador absolutely is the closest confidant and best friend the Emperor has ever known. Back to the story. After the discussion on Malcador, the Emperor tells Magnus why he wanted him here. To ensure his words could not be manipulated by the gods of chaos, and to offer his son forgiveness. In truth, the one thing Magnus has been craving the entire time: to return to his father's side. At least in my opinion. The visions continue as the two of them soar through the immaterium, passing through time and space back to old Earth, watching the passage of time throughout the ages, the eras of devastation followed by triumph, as the Emperor finally emerged to guide his race, the great crusade that followed, and the conquest of the galaxy. Yet rather than fall to chaos, Horus continued to lead his brothers, the entire galaxy under the control of mankind. Next we see the truth of Magnus upon the Golden Throne, the role he was always intended to take. Yet rather than a ruined casket of a body, he sits in a peaceful calm. The portal doors are open without any sign of the Neverborn, and Magnus's mind flies through the great ocean by his father's side. And this is a far cry from the imprisoned husk always theorized for Magnus's future. How easy the Golden Throne can operate without the pressure of the demonic strain. And really, when you think about it, it does make sense. Magnus has always been more than a physical being. However, rather than lamenting a future lost, the Emperor informs Magnus that a version of this can still come to pass. That hope is never lost. And as they begin to return to the throne room, with Vulcan once more by his father's side, Magnus notices the strain clear on his father's face, the toll that he is having to expend to talk to his son directly. He offers Magnus a chance to re-pledge his loyalty, and together they shall begin the crusade anew. That Magnus and Magnus alone, of all the traitor Primarchs, is still in command of his soul. And I'm not sure I agree with that. Maybe it's true, or the Emperor is simply saying something to help sway his son. Because for me, I would say Kurz is definitely still a possibility for that, despite his insanity. Though admittedly he did certainly begin exhibiting some chaos-enhanced traits in the Unremembered Empire series. And the other, Magnus argues, is Perturabo, and I couldn't agree more with that. As we begun the week with their friendship, so too at the end, we see it here still strong. Despite everything, a bond of brothers. Now this is a part I'm not so keen on, as Vulcan states that's why Perturabo is lost, because he'd never break his pledge to Horus, and he's so consumed with his hatred of Rogul. Now hatred of Rogul I get, but he broke his pledge to the Emperor, so we can't exactly use his pledge to Horus as a valid excuse. If you go back in time to the Perturabo who raced to meet his father, with tears streaming down his face, I could easily still see a part of him longing for that embrace once more. If only he was able to be in his father's presence once more. Regardless, however, Magnus relents, knowing Vulcan speaks the truth, and realizes that this is what he wanted all along: to return to his father's side and the cause of mankind. There is, of course, as always with the Emperor, a price that needs to be paid. His legion cannot return with him. They are already damned. The flesh change that curses them is uncurable. But he will be given a new legion, one greater than any yet known. And as much as I don't like this ultimatum, making Magnus choose personal redemption over his sons, honestly, how else could it have been resolved? We know how Magnus ends up. There had to be a price he couldn't pay. And the life of his sons is it. How could any father? Magnus begs his father for another way, turning to Vulcan, asking him if he could sacrifice his sons, to which the Lord of Drakes of course replies no. And as Magnus fills with anger at his father once more, the strongest anger within him is reserved for himself, for very nearly saying yes. And with that, the fight is on. The two Primarchs' duel is of course epic, with Magnus inflicting blow after blow on his brother, and Vulcan just keeps coming no matter what Magnus throws at him. Eventually Magnus slays one of Vulcan's sons, who arrives to assist his Primarch, and in his rage, Vulcan unleashes a torrent of blows into his brother, shattering Magnus's body with hit after hit, driving him to the floor, smashing his face again and again, over and over, until the Primarch of Magnus the Red is broken and shattered. Vulcan, crestfallen, berates his brother in refusing to put the Imperium over his already damned sons, and Magnus replies in the only way that he can, that even one was too much. And in this final, tragic moment, Magnus gives his soul over to the Chaos God, Tzeentch, being banished forever from the Imperial Palace. And so the Primarch as we knew him is gone, and the Demon Primarch arises. Man, I've said it before and I'll say it again. This was an absolute masterclass read from Graham McNeill. It really was. Even with the outcome known, he managed to make me shocked, surprised, saddened, and everything in between. I knew it was impossible, yet I was right there, yearning for a Magnus redemption, only to have my heart broken at the end. I'll be honest, I had a tear in my eye when I was reading this. Such an amazing conclusion to one of the best character journeys out there. Man, I'm emotionally exhausted just talking about it. If any of you out there have listened to this without having read it, it may not have quite the emotional impact of The Unknown, but I can guarantee you will still go on an emotional roller coaster. You really do need to read Fury of Magnus, but make sure you go back and read 1,000 Suns first. However, as always guys, what do you think? What was your reaction to this end of Magnus's story? Was the price too much to pay? Or should Magnus have accepted his father's offer? What did you make of his interaction in coming face to face with his brother Vulcan? And were you surprised in the outcome of their fight? As always, leave your thoughts in the comments below. I love to read them. Huge thank you to all my subscribers. Your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. And if you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too? But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.